In the name of God, Creator, Pain-bearer and Spirit of life. In our Anglican Church, we have a vertical column of authority. When the clergy process into a service, the order is from the front. That is, the lower ranks progressing through to the Archbishop if he's present, he or she is present. And at the end is the Archbishop, the culmination of the whole procession, as it were. But at our evensong service on New Year's Day, the Archbishop will be usurped by Her Excellency the Governor, Sir Francis Adamson. Now, this order of hierarchy is reflected here in the Gospel reading. We see the Baptist referring to Jesus as the one more powerful and important than he, and whose sandals he was not fit to untie. He saw himself and was viewed by the Gospel writers as the herald, as the one who would announce to the world of that time the arrival of the long yearned for Messiah. Matthew has Jesus reinforcing the people's image of John as his predecessor, his introduction, so to speak. But verse 11 is very telling. John is the greatest person. But, says Jesus, the ones at the bottom of the heap are greater in the eyes of God than he is. So it's a complete reversal of what we might see as normal human respect and deference and hierarchy. Absolutely the opposite. Turned on its head. This is Jesus every time. This is God working every time. Here we catch a glimpse into the very heart and the intent of Jesus and his ministry. We also catch a glimpse into the very heart and nature of God. Scales of human power and pomp and ceremony do not impress God. The king or queen in their gorgeous robes and crowned with jewels, the bishop in mitre and cope, all this glorious dress means nothing to God. It's what is under the covering that is of interest. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind will receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. It is what one does, how one leads their life, what is in their heart that is impressive, not the outer coverings. The ancient church father Augustine said about this question of John, I quote Augustine, "Are you the one who should come? Ask my works," said Augustine. John Wesley wrote, "The least true Christian believer has a more perfect knowledge of Jesus Christ, of his redemption and kingdom than John the Baptist had, who died before the full manifestation of the gospel." I'd never really thought of that, to be honest. Yes, of course, John was murdered before Jesus' ministry had really got into full swing. He died knowing that the Messiah had come and that he had taken a part in that arrival, but he had to be content in never seeing the fulfillment of all his beliefs and his promises. That can raise another question for us. We can often become disillusioned and downhearted, frustrated even, if we see nothing in return for our efforts. It's easy to sit in a half-empty church and grieve for those people who do not respond or respond in a negative fashion to our invitations to join us in experiencing the presence of and worshipping a forgiving and wastefully loving Spirit of God through Christ. Look at that question. Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? These are almost words of despair. They're certainly words of uncertainty. This is what place does to you. It changes you. It determines interpretation. It's the place from which you might now have to make an alternative sense of the world. This week, John the Baptist is in a new place. He's gone from freedom to confinement. He's in prison. From wide open spaces to the captivity of a cell, a change of place causes a change of perspective. No longer in the wilderness, no longer baptizing in the Jordan River, no longer having people come to him. John is now in a different desert, no longer prophesying but questioning, with people likely positioning themselves as far away from him as possible. Freed Taliban hostage, you might recall this, a man by the name of Timothy Weeks, if you think back, says he never gave up hope. He would be rescued during 3 long and tortuous years in captivity in Afghanistan. Weeks said he had been profoundly changed by the experience. That time that I spent as a hostage with the Taliban has had a profound and unimaginable effect on me, he said. Visibly emotional, when he was interviewed, he said, "At times I felt as if my death was imminent and that I would never return to see those that I love again. But by the will of God, I am here. I am alive, and I am safe, and I feel free. There is nothing in the world that I need. Nothing else in the world that I need." Despite the gravity of what he endured, Weeks said he never lost hope. "I had hope the whole time. I knew that I would leave that place eventually," he said. The experience has left him feeling stronger, with a belief that he can get through anything. It's given me a great sense of hope and a great sense of confidence, he said. When you're imprisoned, your questions change. When you're captive, your yearnings change. You then have an altered sense of freedom. The freedom to ask questions you've not risked asking before. You've not dared to voice, or you've been told you should not utter. We need to keep in mind Jesus' response to John's question. There is no condemnation of John's question, not at all. Rather, Jesus acknowledges John's inquiry as a demonstration of faith. "Go and tell him," says Jesus. "Go and tell John to believe in whom I know him to be. Go and tell John he is more than who he might have thought himself to be. Go and tell John he did what he was called to do." Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? Is the question of longing for what we dearly hope, but then wonder if it can really eventuate. Longing for promises to come true when it seems that the cards are stacked against us. Longing for what was, but at the same time looking forward to what could be. Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? Is the question at the heart of Advent. It gives voice to our latent hesitancy, even in the midst of anticipation. It allows us to express uncertainty, even though our viewpoint is on the other side of the incarnation. It provides us with the words to articulate what our hearts our souls actually feel when our mind tries to convince us to stay quiet? We can all ask that question. Let's be honest. We all have our doubts and uncertainties. We're all in one way or another confined in that question. Am I the one who is to come, or should we wait for another? Maybe the answer can be found in the words of the modern Christian hymn, which we just sang this morning, where the main inspirations are Isaiah chapter 6, where the Lord calls Isaiah, and in 1 Samuel chapter 3, where the Lord calls Samuel. It's a beautiful piece of writing, a lovely story. You should go home and look it up in the Old Testament in your Bibles. 1 Samuel chapter 3, read it. It's gorgeous. And of course, Isaiah 6. Where the Lord calls Samuel, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here am I. Prison, often of our own making. But we can still ask that question, and perhaps we should ask it of ourselves. Perhaps we could paraphrase, send me. Remember the chorus we just sang? Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart. It's not just referring to those who are ordained. It includes every Christian. There's a wonderful, reassuring and invigorating message for Advent. Our doubts can be replaced with peace and renewed life.